So I'm delighted that to debate this topic further, we're joined by two people who have deep expertise in both technology and how it impacts the labour market. Chloe Smith is a Member of Parliament for Norwich North. From April to July this year, she was the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. And before that, she was the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Anna Thomas is co-founder and director at the Institute for the Future of Work. She is a former barrister who was appointed counsel to the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Please join me in welcoming them both to the stage.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you very much, Chloe, for joining us for this conversation on this very important topic. You are, I think, in a really unique position as a former Secretary of State, also immersed in the fringe this week. I'd love to kick off by asking you about your personal experience from the proximity you've had to this great swell of events, energy, engagement, ideas that we've seen from civil society across the country.
I mean, look, I think it's absolutely great, and first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here with you. But I also hope everybody participating has had such a positive experience as you and I have had this week. It is so important that we have a series of events like this, and for it to be a fringe complementing a global summit, I think is a really significant format, because it allows all the voices to come out, and that's what's so essential here. I was reflecting on the hopes really for there to be something of a national conversation about the challenges that are inherent within this technology. We've drawn out many of those issues and challenges through this week of discussions, but there's more to go, because as we know and as we see, we are all concerned about both the opportunity and the risk that is coming with this technology, that is already with us with this technology. And therefore, there's lots still to talk about and to debate in an inclusive manner. And I can also, I think, perhaps add to that, speaking personally as a legislator and as a formerly in the leadership positions on these issues, there is a lot that will be going on, I think, in Parliament and in the months to come, complementing what is being spoken about in industry, in civil society, in academia, and many of which are represented here.
Yes, it feels very much the start of a discourse and the start of building a responsible AI ecosystem, really, rather than the end. And one of the challenges that there will be is capturing and building on the work that so many people have done this week, including ourselves. We had a conference on the future of work yesterday. For anyone that missed it, it's being live streamed. There's the People's Panel. Yes. There's a conference today, I think, at Queen Mary's on governance more widely. There's so much. Does this suggest perhaps that government's convening role is extended? And perhaps there could be even more to support civil society organisations to build their capacity to ensure that we grasp it, enrich it, and keep it going.
I think there's absolutely. I think there's a real opportunity there. I would say I don't think that necessarily actually the leadership could only be exercised by government in that space. I genuinely think there are equal partners and equal components of the task in hand here. Something that has really struck me is thinking of all of us as users and people who are experiencing the technology. Of course, we do that in many cases as consumers, and we might come on to that. In some cases as workers, and that's definitely the subject of today, but also as citizens. And for all of us, many of those things will be true at the same time. So we've got multiple types of accountability that we're looking for in those debates and in the work that lies ahead. I think, as you would expect me to say, the democratic form of accountability is really important. And so, people rightly will look to their government here and in every other country as well, of course, for what government needs to do. But actually, we also have accountability in these other, public spheres, public and private spheres, in the sense of consumers or the workplace also.
And perhaps preceding that is capacity building to allow people, whether or not it's directly or indirectly, for civil society to continue in this discourse. So however it happens, whether or not it's a sort of arm of the New Safety Institute or a different type of representation on the panels that have been suggested, this might be something that should be picked up following the Fringe.
I'm confident it will be, and I think what we've seen come out of what's going on with colleagues at Bletchley Park today and yesterday, is a clear rhythm ahead. There's going to be, as we've seen, more drawing on partners in South Korea and in France in 6 months and 12 months. And that means there will absolutely be a kind of a calendar and a rhythm and a structure to these really important issues.
Yeah, that's so important. And we saw yesterday in our sector-specific panels in health, for example, that put nurses, intensive care nurses, together with academics. In health and in creative industries, put Naomi Pohl, the General Secretary of the Musicians Union, together with voice actors and others, that type of conversation was necessary to really understand, to really get under the bonnet of everyday impacts. And how we should begin to think about monitoring them and responding to them, including by regulation.
Well, indeed, and this is a really essential part of the approach. And so just taking a second to reflect on the overall architecture that we're looking at here. Obviously, as you will know, and as participants at the Fringe will know, what's being envisaged in the UK is a regulatory architecture. So it's not that you could necessarily legislate straight off for a technology that is moving this fast. There would be challenges in that approach. But instead, what the government white paper proposes to do is to look to regulators, existing regulators in all of the existing spheres that are regulated in our public services or indeed in our workplaces, and ask them to draw together the guidance and the appropriate products that will support that particular sector and that particular use of AI in that sector. Because it's necessary to get down to that individual level rather than try to have something that is more one size fits all. So there absolutely is going to be an ongoing space where we need to look to those regulators to do that work. We need to, I hope, support them in doing that work and ensure that there's the right capacity and capability there. And of course, there will continue to be a very strong space for public involvement in that because it's public service.
Perhaps this is a good point to loop back then to work and what we can learn from work, not just as something that is a very important thing in its own right. It's an interface with AI on a daily basis for a lot of people, but as a lens and a bridge of thinking about what's happening now to future planning too. Also, thinking about work is a way of thinking beyond just jobs lost or created to really getting, thinking about some of the wider qualitative, social or ethical impacts that we're looking at and we're facing. So unpicking a little bit what you've said about the regulation, is there anything that we're seeing at a sort of international, national and workplace level, directions, which is something that we could look towards capturing in harder regulation?
Potentially. And the reason I could only perhaps give quite a general answer to that question is because actually that would be such a broad, such a massive question in which there would be a lot of detail. And I think the task of getting all of that detail out now is going to be the work at hand. I mean, let's just take one example that affects workplaces. There are many more examples than this, but if we think about the work of the Health and Safety Executive in the UK or in England, perhaps more specifically, there is, there will undoubtedly be things that they want to look at about impacts of AI in the responsibilities they already conduct on behalf of employers and employees, and they will, I hope, be spending the coming months coming up with essentially the answer to your question. And then there's going to be more regulators than just them, obviously, in terms of the workplace. We last met when we were hosted by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and that is a further example of a type of workplace regulation, slightly different to the first example. All of this, of course, then needs to be bound together a bit, doesn't it? And that's why I think it's good that the government has spoken about a central risk function So that's looking at the kind of horizon scanning of, okay, let's do step one, and then what else might come over time. And also, I think what we all very much want to see out of this is a unified, principles-based approach. You want to see consistency, actually, between what all those sets of guidance might say. And workers very much would want that. And that's why you've got those principles set out, again, in the white paper that the government published earlier this year.
I guess thinking about operationalising them in the workplace, and what you've said about the regulators and the importance of connecting them and working together, as is happening to some extent with the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. Something that came out of our conference yesterday and has come out of a lot of recent work is the importance of the lack perhaps of real capacity in this space, and some gaps which in the workplace context we are seeing already.
Yes, indeed, and I really think this is something that will come to the fore in the coming months. I think it's probably important maybe to say at this point that there's been, this returns us to the point of the value of both the Fringe and the Summit and these things that are happening at the moment. The Summit has focused specifically on a gap that was there, which is what is the state of play on safety at the frontier. That is one thing amongst many that is here in this technology, and it's absolutely right that that the Fringe and the rest of the government's work beyond the Summit is looking at those things that are with us here and now. The risk, the most extreme version of the risk concept may well be some years off or some time off, and that's subject to plenty of debate in itself. But there are things happening here and now that we need to be thinking about as well.
And thinking about connecting them, something that I thought was quite cool that came out of or we're seeing in the Hiroshima process, is the way in which it does connect the here and now, or the approach, with what's happening in the future. Yep. So these broad directions: identify your stakeholders, as early as possible in the tech cycle and the job cycle, it would be. Proactively identify your risks and your impacts, take steps to mitigate those in the best way you can, and then monitor them. Seem to be something that you do see cutting through the different levels of the development of regulation. Am I right?
Well, I think so. No, I think you're absolutely correct, and certainly as a just as with all my years of experience as an MP, that is what I expect those regulators to be doing now. And if they're not, then actually Parliament shall be, seeking to support them and hold them to account in doing so. What you say there is a very sensible approach. In fact, it's so sensible that I would also highlight that it's the kind of thing that employers ought to be doing at present as well. And we've discussed before, of course, about some of the challenges that are there in the labour market. Even notwithstanding technology, how are we going to help people who are presently economically inactive or unemployed into the workplace? Because a job is, first of all, because there are actually, a million vacancies still in the economy, and there's many opportunities there that we just have to help people to get connected to. And by the way, I think AI can help in that matching and that connection. Perhaps we might come on to that. But good employers are already recognising that they need to think about where their talent is coming from and how they recruit and retain talent and how they support people in the workplace, in which health is a rising issue and a rising topic. The best employers are already doing this. You don't need necessarily a sort of a banner of diversity, equity and inclusion under which to do it. Good employers are actually already just doing it as a matter of course, using very sensible planning techniques like you're referring to there. And I hope they continue, because that's actually how you get humans best supported and best placed.
I guess as a slight provocation, something that came out of the conference yesterday from the head of futures at the CIPD was SMEs in particular, who we know from our work are in fact using generative AI and frontier to automate cognitive tasks just as they are manual tasks, and their rate of adoption is for that element as much as with larger companies, asking for help. So saying, how do we do it? Is it on us, was the question asked. Is it really on us to decide how to do it in this way without, something more specific to operationalise the principles in the area of work? does that, are there not advantages in capturing that big overarching picture, the principles, these basic obligations, these basic red lines now, the sooner the better, and then working up sector or domain-specific, detailed regulation, which will take years?
Yeah. So I think actually what you've just described is what's happening. Actually, so and by which I mean you've got the summit level work and the global level agreements which are setting out big red lines, absolutely happening. You can see it from yesterday and elsewhere. The white paper does exactly this in terms of principles. Those principles are set out in black and white. Those are there. As you then say, and as we've already explained this morning, the regulation work then follows that and must track back to those principles. So exactly what you say is what is set out and is already happening in terms of the government approach and what Parliament will then be looking at. But taking up the point about SMEs, which is significant here, isn't it? Because of the obviously the spread of sizes of firms throughout our economy, and we all know that the great majority of the British economy is smaller firms. Yes, I think it is the case that they will be looking for some level of guidance and some level of support, and that's often the case. I touched on how to build an inclusive workforce, and actually helping smaller firms to do that is already an established topic, because it's perhaps not so straightforward for them compared to some of the bigger guys. But is it then on firms and on employers to do so once they have a bit of help and guidance in hand? Yes, I think it is, because every firm is free to choose which product or service to use. Every consumer is free to choose which product or service to use. Obviously, the work in hand this week is to try to make sure that those products and services are based in, fairness and other principles. That's essential. But yes, employers absolutely can start to make use of the extent of the opportunity that this technology brings. And they are already doing so. I mean, the Federation of Small Business had a recent report out, the Tectonic, I'm thinking of, which explained, as well, why small firms want to do that. Often, for them, in a tough economy at the moment, it's about increasing resilience by using new products or seeking greater productivity through this technology.
But to some extent, it may be a matter of time frame. But I think that because of the evidence as well, that's sort of coalescing around the importance of high involvement practices and early intervention and preemptive work, there is increasingly a case for imposing, at least in the workplace, preemptive obligations and associated duties to enable this to happen in practice, the principles to be operationalised, and get to the better outcomes.
Well, and so I think here is a great opportunity then for your institute and many other partners who've been here at as part of this, to do exactly this. I sincerely hope and believe it's the case that the doors are open for this, and I would really encourage that to be a strong outcome of this week's work.
Perhaps that's the next frontier of responsible AI, and the most important thing that could come out of the summit follow-up. We're moving towards perhaps thinking about work regulation, at least in a different way, learning from it, and perhaps an overall approach. A strategic approach, strategy even, on work would complement the work in Bletchley and the AI strategy very well.
Well, I think this is going to be one of the major topics of ongoing conversation. Obviously, the Bletchley agenda itself, I think, has had to be somewhat limited because there are actually only so many hours in the day. So you just have to begin where you most strongly need to and go from there. On the point about planning for work, I was really struck by some of the research that I know the Institute has been drawing out, and it's part of the Fireside work. And it does acknowledge that actually there's going to be still a great deal of unpredictability in this, and that therefore actually it's not necessarily capable of being planned for to the nth degree, which takes us on perhaps to just touching on what do we expect the broader impacts of this technology to be in the workplace. And I'm one who expects this to be a very broad base of change, indeed, the change is already happening, right? This isn't just some future thing. You know, we are in this already, and perhaps, arguably, have been in it for decades. You know, as computers and technology have increased and will continue to do so. So there'll be a lot of change, of course. I personally take the view that you know, it's not possible to say whether there'd be a net plus or a net negative. You know, they'll just be broad-based change, and we certainly want to make sure, we as a society certainly want to make sure that people are well enough skilled and also able to perhaps think through what they hope to do over the years of their career and the years of their working life, whether that's someone who's coming out of school or college now, or whether that's a 50-year-old who may be changing jobs or work, you know, at a quite different stage of life. Yes, this is going to be changeable and complex.
I'm being told that we're out of time, but to wrap up, thank you so much. We're being told about, you know, we're thinking about multiple futures of work and the roles and responsibilities that we all have to steer a better future of fairer work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.